Hi everyone, my name is Hakan and in today's video we'll be discussing clean architecture. In the first part of this video I'll shortly be talking about what clean architecture is, and afterwards I'll be showcasing a project setup using the clean architecture and showing some implementation details. So this is a visual representation of the clean architecture. It has four distinct components. These are called layers. At the center of it we have the domain layer, which is the core of our system. Around the domain layer, we have the application layer, which acts as an orchestrator for the domain layer and tells it how to perform the business logic. On the outside, we have the presentation and infrastructure layer. I'll start from the domain layer and go outwards. In the domain layer, we will typically define things like our domain entities containing the most important business rules. Here you can see things like aggregates, value objects, domain events if you're using domain-driven design. We can define repository interfaces, factory interfaces, things like domain services. And this is also a good place to define custom exceptions. The domain layer has one very important rule, and that is that it cannot reference any of the outer layers. The outer layers can reference the domain layer, but it cannot be the other way around. Moving one level up, we have the application layer. This layer acts as an orchestrator for our system. In the application layer, we will define our most important use cases. Typically, this layer is implemented as a set of application services, or if you're using the CQRS pattern, this is where you will define your queries and commands. So on the outside of the clean architecture, there are two layers which have the same importance. I'll be starting with the infrastructure layer. In the infrastructure layer, you will see anything that is related to external systems. We will define things like database access, message queues, notification services, email services. If you're using EF Core, the EF Core types will be defined here, like your DB context and migrations. Last but not least, we have the presentation layer. This layer is used to define as an entry point for the outer world for users to interact with our system. Typically, the presentation layer is implemented either as a RESTful API or something modern like a gRPC. In here, we define things like our minimal API endpoints, controllers, custom filters, and middleware. So let's jump into the code. I've created this solution using the clean architecture approach, where for each layer I've created a separate project. So I've got my domain, application, infrastructure, and presentation. Inside of the domain layer, I've defined my entity, which is a simple to-do entity with a couple of properties. I'm also using a custom exception, which I've also defined inside of the domain layer, which just inherits from exception and passes on the message. I've also defined a to-do repository interface with a couple of methods for getting, updating, and deleting to-dos. The actual implementation of this will be inside of the infrastructure project. So what's also important to note is that inside of the CS proj of the domain layer, there are no references to any of the outer layers. So next is the application layer. Inside of the application layer, I'm using a CQRS approach with the mediator package. So inside of the to-dos folder, I have defined my commands and queries. Each of my commands have the same kind of structure where I'm defining a command inheriting from iRequest from the mediator package. Then I'm creating a command handler, which injects a to-do repository and does the necessary processing with the command and adding a to-do to the database, and at the end returning a type of iResult. Also, I have a command validator, which uses the abstract validator from the Fluent validation package. So the delete and the update have the same type of structure, where the delete only has no validator, but it has a command and the respective handler, and the same for the update. Inside of the shared folder, I have a validation behavior. So for all my commands where I do use a validator, they all get passed by this validation behavior of a pipeline behavior. So this kind of works like middleware, where the requests get sent to my handlers, but first they enter this pipeline behavior. And if I have any validates for that command type, then the request will be validated. If it is valid, only then the next delegate inside of the pipeline will be called, which is my handler. And when it's not valid, the validation problem will be returned. So what's also important is I've created this extension method on the iService collection, where I'm registering my validators. I'm registering all the mediator commands and handlers. Also, I'm registering the pipeline behavior. Also, what to note is that the only reference I've set is to the domain project and none of the outer layers. So inside of my infrastructure layer, I've got my database access implementations, where I have my repository implementation for creating, updating, and getting to-dos. I've got my migrations folder, and inside of it, my migrations to my SQL Server database. I've got the DB context, which is a simple DB context with one table. I've got a configurations folder for configuring my entities. And I have another dependency injection class, which just has an extension method on the iService collection to register the DB context and the repository. As an argument, it takes the iConfiguration to get the connection string from the app settings. So this project references the application project. And because the application project references the domain project, that's the reason why I can use the to-do entity inside of the infrastructure layer. So last but not least, I've got the presentation layer in which my to-do endpoints are defined using minimal APIs. Each of my endpoints injects the iSender from the mediator package, where I can just create the correct to-do query or command and send it towards the handler. And because all of my handlers return a type of iResult, I can just say immediately return sender.send. I've also defined a DTO for updating and creating, which is also defined inside of the presentation layer. And I have a dependency injection class again, where I've defined an extension method on the iEndpoint route builder to map my to-do endpoints, which is this method right here, map to-do endpoints. Also, when I create another class of endpoints, I can just come here and say builder.map, let's say block or post endpoints. So my presentation layer only references the application layer. So you might wonder why I define my endpoints outside of the web application, where in a lot of examples, the web application is being used as the presentation layer. Well, to support dependency injection, you have to define all your service registrations inside of the web application. And that means you have to reference all of the projects. So right now, my web API has a reference to the application, infrastructure, and presentation. But if this was also my presentation layer, that would mean I would have access to the infrastructure layer as the presentation layer. And then nothing stops me from just injecting my DB context right into this endpoint and using that instead of my query and command handlers. So that would also break the clean architecture rule, where the presentation layer is only supposed to reference the application layer and not the infrastructure layer. The outer layers should only reference the inner layers, and not an outer layer should not reference another outer layer. So that's why I have my presentation layer as a separate class library, just referencing the application layer. And inside of the web application, there I'm referencing all the projects, registering all the needed services, mapping my endpoints, and tying all the or wiring up all the layers together. So that was a quick overview of the project setup with the clean architecture. In a future video, I will be doing the implementation step by step by first creating the domain, then the application layer, presentation, infrastructure, and wiring up all together. So yeah, thank you for watching, keep building, and I'll see you next time.